Welcome to Explore, Explain, Highlights. In this highlights package, we'll be looking at Season 4, Episode 6, with our guest, Chimdi Nwosu, discussing the project Incarcerated in America and Press Freedom Index.
You mentioned that this style was something that you were inspired to perhaps practice and apply from attending a course by Federica Fragapane, which is wonderful to hear. Can you just tell me a bit more about that course and kind of what it was that really kind of got under your skin about this potential style to express yourself?
Absolutely, Andy. I think like you yourself, I'm sure you know Frederica. Like I think anyone who is a fan of database, you've heard of her or you might
Right.
have seen whether or not you know it. And so for me, just with that desire and that love for beautiful database, it was inevitable that I encountered her work. And so as I'm getting to know more of what she's done, her background, somewhere along the line, I found out she's got a course on Domestika where she actually goes through her process on how she creates these visualizations. And so it allows you to think about, how you're going to show things, what you want to show, and even the physical hands-on steps to
Mm.
go through the process. So to me, I think it was just the fact that when she approaches her data vises, I don't think I've seen her use a standard chart ever.
Mm.
I know she has, but I don't think I've personally seen it.
Mm.
However, you get to see her work. It's won numerous awards globally. So my point is her work is still able to connect with people in such a deep way, regardless of the fact that some of it is stuff that, is not standard. And so
Mm.
to me, that really appealed because I think why her work is so successful is like when you look at it, it just invokes like great feelings, like good
Yeah.
feelings, like something really amazing. And so I wanted to be able to do that with my work, where it's just like, everyone knows what a line chart is and what a bar chart is, but trying to sit down, like it's like going to a museum and letting everyone have their own experience.
And this is a broader point to make about all redesigns of visualizations. It's not always that something's bad or problematic or
Exactly.
wrong. It's just that there's other ways to skin a cat. There's other ways to do it. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. So that's really
Yeah.
what it boils down to is how would you visualize this kind of information? And
Yeah.
so the cool thing about it and why I really encourage a lot of people, if you want to stimulate yourself mentally and even inspire yourself to be consistent, that is a very good thing to look into Make Over Monday. Why? Because you already know this is how I might look at this information. We know ourselves best. But in looking at how other people have done it, how they've also executed, you get to see the other possibilities. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, you actually get to see reviews and feedback from the
Yeah.
experts. So there's the Viz review portion where they look at the Vizs and they give you feedback on what's good and what's not so great. And then finally, there's the Watch Me Viz where Andy, who is just probably the greatest Tableau user there is right now, he's actually building his live. So it's this whole production. It's like, yeah, we're just building stuff on Twitter, but it's a lot more than that. This is
Yeah.
changing lives every single day. And there's so much that you get to see coming out of that. If you see someone who is doing good stuff on Tableau Public, there's probably a 90% chance that that person did make over money for a while. At
Yeah.
least that's what I've noticed. And
Yeah.
so to me, it's the same thing when I feel like I'm jonesing for a database and you not always have the time to commit to a personal project. There's like thousands of data sets you can go to and articles that you can read for, a background on everything. So it's just fantastic. You put your work out there, you share, you inspire, and you
Yeah.
build your portfolio at the same time. Like,
I mean, do you set your own deadlines? Do you sort of impose your own artificial constraints to challenge yourself to say, right, I'm going to do this in 2 days, and if it takes longer, bad luck to me. That's just the way it is. How do you kind of manage the time, or do you just go for it and see when it finishes?
um, I think initially I would do a lot of time boxing to
Mm.
say, let's get it out by this time.
Mm.
Um, for this piece, I didn't do that. And I found over time I don't do that for my personal stuff.
Right.
It's necessary at work, but personally, no. And the reason is because I noticed that, let's say I start working on something on Monday and
Right.
it's ongoing. By Wednesday or Friday, I might have had like 2 to 3 new ideas and changed everything. And so to me, I don't believe in rushing anymore. It's like I want to put out quality content in
Mm,
the community. I want to challenge myself in whatever way I want to challenge myself. And so I'm just going to do it. And then when I feel it's done, then I'm just going to put it out there. Right. And then if I want to get feedback from someone, I'll give them the viz at the point where I'm done my iteration. And then
yeah.
if their feedback requires me to make any changes, then I'll go ahead and make those changes. But
Yeah.
I think if it takes me now a week to do something, I'm absolutely comfortable. I've heard so many conversations with people in the community about how sometimes you just kind of iterate and you're just like, what am I even doing?
Yeah.
And so I no longer feel weird about that. I used to think like, man, you don't know what you're doing if it's taking you this long to do this. But it's just more about, because it's a passionate project, a passion project, you want it
Mm,
to be how you want it to be. You know
mm,
what you share with people, and you want to like package it really nicely for them. So I think that just drives a lot of my thing now, is just get it done. Like I have a Makeover Monday I've been sitting on now for, it's been almost a month. I promised myself, okay, put it out this weekend, get
mm.
it done. The reason why it isn't done yet is because I finished it 3 different times. And then each time I come back, it's like, oh, but you can do this. So I embrace that now. I
Yeah.
think it's a creative process. And like, let's say you iterated this 4 or 5 times. Those are 4 or 5 ideas that you didn't use today, you can use
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
Exactly right. That recyclability of ideas. I don't think there's any blind alley that's a bad blind alley. I think there's always benefit in things that you try that don't kind of work out for this situation. You might reuse them again later, but
Yeah.
also, again, you talked before about that kind of artistic sensibility that is the
Mhm.
sort of backstory there. Any artist asked the question, when is something finished in their mind, is always quite an enigmatic answer. It is often a feeling. It is something where you just inside say, done.
Yeah,
Don't touch it
exactly.
anymore, because any further touching or tweaking might break this. Leave it. And it's a
Yeah.
hard thing to try to tell other people what signs to look for, other than very mechanical. Have you done this? Yes or no. There is just a
Mhm.
sense of done. Voila, finished. Move
Exactly.
on. Yeah. Your work is so characterized, in my view, with the care and attention to annotate things, to explain things, to introduce things, to not assume that the audience gets everything immediately, and to
Mhm.
not treat them like idiots, but to give them that sense to sort of smarten them up along the journey. And
Yeah.
but there's a lot here, but it's all useful. It's all worth including, whether it's the titles, the intros, the how to read guides.
Mhm.
Again, just on a broader basis, perhaps not just anchored to this piece. Is that I don't know, a trait that you've brought more into your work the more you've done, or is it something that you always felt was an important thing? You always knew that you had to ensure that the audience was always informed about what to read, how to read it, what it's about, what you're seeing, what you're not seeing.
Good question. I'd say that it's it's a bit of both, in a
Hmm.
sense that when I initially started doing data viz, right? So I would just make stuff. And then one of the biggest pieces of advice I got was put yourself in the shoes of your audience and
Yeah,
then try to see how they see your work.
yeah,
And so I would look at what I'm doing, and then it would hit me like, okay, if I was somebody else, I would ask, what does this mean? And then that would lead me to now add in some type of annotation or legend, et cetera, et cetera. And then over time, practicing in the field, mingling with the data fam, interacting and having conversations, you kind of start to understand like, this is actually what you should be doing, like
yeah,
every time. And so I think that just sort of made it into a habit for me, because I already kind of knew that it was something that was necessary. But then once it was confirmed, like this is going to take you from good to great, and it's going to make it that much easier for your users, it then becomes a question of how can you not have a legend if you want people
yeah,
to connect deeply with your work? So that to me is like, honestly, I consider that very core, foundational,
yeah.
something think is optional. I think a legend is like a bare basic essential for database.
Right.
And I think that that's just more of there's going to be a personal preference aspect to it,
Sure.
but also in this to answer specific to this particular viz there, it was more about the consistency, right? So for example, if you see 5 B swarm charts, by the time you get to the second or third B swarm chart, your mind is already in the flow of like how you're interpreting this information.
Yeah.
You didn't want to disrupt that with
Yeah.
new stuff. And so I put all the high level stuff, even though it's a lot of high level stuff, I put it at the top. But then and going back to those questions that are going to be naturally coming, how did it do over time? How did they change? How do they compare? Now that information is still available, except it's in the tooltip. So you have a lot of information, but it is not presented in an overwhelming way, which is how I tend to feel when I see someone that just like gives you everything on the page. It's like,
Sure.
how would you feel if you walked into the store and I just threw the entire, collection at you and told you to pick one, right? That's not, you need to work your way through things. And I believe information absorption is the same way. If you want it to stick, you give gradual, right? And then you allow them to find what they want. And that's the cool thing about the tooltip. The tooltip is there. They know it's there, but they're only going to go there if they care about what's in it.
Thank you for joining us for this Explore, Explain, Highlights episode. As always, the full episode is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We hope to see you again soon on another episode of Explore, Explain,